First, we start off with a historic breakthrough. For the first time the first time ever, leaders of all 27 European Union countries agreed to make cuts in the bloc's budget for the next 7 years. This will be the first austerity budget in the Union's history, but concerns remain on the European Parliament and whether they may or may not reject the agreement. Jack Barton reports.
After 24 hours of marathon negotiations, European leaders finally agreed on a new 7-year EU budget. And at €959 billion, it represents the first ever budget reduction in the EU's 56-year history, and a figure well short of the original proposal of more than €1 trillion.
It's perhaps nobody's perfect budget, but there's a lot in it for everybody.
The deal strikes a balance between the demands of northern European countries that insisted on belt-tightening and countries in the south and east that wanted sustained spending on agricultural subsidies and infrastructure, which allowed all sides to claim victory.
So I think the British public can be proud that we've cut the 7-year credit card limit for the European Union for the first time ever.
The budget must now face the European Parliament. The budget includes spending plans of €959 billion, but commitments from member states only totalling €908 billion, which leaves a shortfall that already has some worried that the budget may still be vetoed.
I think it's very difficult for the Parliament to accept this proposal. And the reasons are very simple. First of all, they create a deficit.
So an historic agreement has been reached, but for it to stick, the budget must still navigate its way through a hostile European Parliament, which could still decide that it's back to the drawing board. Jack Barton, CCTV, Brussels.
And for our Eurozone expert, Clara Marina O'Donnell joins us. She is Senior Fellow at the Center for European Reform. Thank you very much for joining us on Biz Asia America. Let me first start asking you about this particular budget deal for our viewers to help better understand the situation. Countries have budget deals. A small portion of that is placed into this pool with 27 countries, and this is the deal that the 27 countries, or the leaders of 27 countries, have come to terms with. Help explain to our viewer the significance of this.
So it really depends what benchmark you use. It's not chump change. We are looking at €1 trillion over the next 7 years. So this is a sizable amount. Now, at the same time, of course, the European bloc is a rich bloc. So what we're really looking at is 1% of EU GDP. Another way of looking at it is actually only 2% of complete national government spending. So what we want to bear in mind here is that each year, obviously...
It's only 2% of all the budgets combined in Europe, correct?
Absolutely. So each year, each national government will raise taxes, will use 98% of those taxes on national programs. In addition to that, 2% or a proportion of 2% will be given to the EU so that the EU institutions, namely the European Commission, have some discretionary funds which will be spent on things such as EU aid, support to farmers, infrastructure projects across the EU and so forth.
So this is sort of, I don't want to say bonus money, but the number itself is not as significant as the deal itself in terms of the leaders, the political leaders coming together on this deal. Now, there was a lot of talk that perhaps the UK was pushing for additional austerity. Is the winner the United Kingdom in this?
I mean, up to a certain point, and as you say, I mean, the key issue here, the reason why this is important is not really the amounts per se, it's how the negotiations went about and the fact that countries managed to get an agreement. Because we have to bear in mind, of course, that European countries at the moment are in the midst of trying to sort out the Eurozone crisis. This has created a lot of bad blood amongst governments. We have the UK that's announced that potentially they're walking out. There was a real risk that these negotiations
at least they got a deal, because look at Congress here. They can't even get a deal, but they got 27 countries and they actually struck a deal. I want to ask you about the parliamentary approval process. Jack Barton mentioned it in a story prior to our interview. Is that a concern?
It is. The European Parliament have said that they might push back on the deal because they believe that cutting back the EU budget is not the answer. They believe that, on the contrary, at a time when the EU budget could be helpful to help certain European countries promote growth and try to overcome the economic crisis. So it remains to be seen whether they'll act upon their threats, but at this stage we have no guarantee that this
So I'm trying to better understand this. Does this help or hurt the growth potential of Europe with this particular deal? Because on one hand, some would say you're cutting back, and the idea of austerity, all growth folks generally dislike austerity. They want to spend more money. But at the same time, a deal is still a deal psychologically. Maybe people can move forward with that. So I'm trying to get a better understanding of, is this good or bad news?
Well, arguably it's good news because the main problem for European leaders is that they didn't need another distraction that would move them away from dealing with more pressing issues about tackling the Eurozone. It's also good that we don't have even further bad blood, which the UK, which sort of kind of strengthened the prospect of them leaving. These are other challenges European leaders did not want to have. So on those levels, it's good news. Now, the downside is, because the European budget is relatively sizable, it could indeed be used to help certain countries on a path back to economic growth. Now, the downside is, yes, it's been cut back, but even more is that some of the areas in which this money is spent are not actually all the areas that you think might be the most pressing. So if governments wanted to, they could have reallocated some of the budget lines to put a lot more on supporting unemployment, youth unemployment, and various states and so forth.
I want to ask you about that, because that seems to be making headlines every other day in the newspapers around the world, which is Europeans, governments, or countries, I should say, dealing with the unemployment issue. And really, it doesn't seem like anything seems to have worked to bring unemployment down. The austerity hasn't worked, that the bailouts haven't worked. In fact, we're still talking about that unemployment number trending higher yet. Still, what needs to be done?
Well, there's a big debate about this in Europe, and half of the European countries would tell you that we've been focusing too much on austerity and that we need to have more measures designed to kickstart growth, that we also need Germany to trigger more domestic growth to offset the fall in demand in some of the southern European countries. Germany and others would dispute this. Now, again, the EU budget in this would only have been a marginal factor, and it has to be said, to EU member states' credit, they have increased the amount of support for competitiveness, within the funding programs, and also support for youth unemployment in several EU member states. So we did see some positive developments, but overall, these programs are still very, very modest. And if EU governments are to really find an answer to getting out of the Eurozone crisis, many of those answers will still be found at the national level, because the reality is, for most economic policy within the EU, this is still very much a national prerogative.
Clara Marina O'Donnell, thank you very much from the European Reform Institute. Thank you for your insights. Certainly the story is going to continue on for some time. We're going to talk more about Southern Europe here. Greece has been one of the countries hit hard by the debt crisis, entering its 6th year of the recession, but it's not stopping many Greeks from starting their own businesses, and many of them are thriving. Philo Contrafori has the story.
The more coffees Adamantios Moustakaria serves, the better for his 6-month-old business. Along with his cousin, they started up this small cafe bar because they couldn't find a job consistent with their college degrees.
More young people like us start up similar businesses because they want to have some stability with their job. They're not looking for profit, but to be their own bosses and get by. Because what is missing in Greece right now is the stability of having a job.
Entrepreneurship in Greece has become the only alternative for many people here since the economic crisis broke. Most Greeks who opt to start a business venture still want to directly serve the customer. But that's changing, according to the report conducted by the Foundation for Economic and Industrial Research.
New ventures that go to manufacturing are low, as in most of the developed part of the world. But it's not going down because of the crisis. It's of the order of 15% or something like that, which is not bad. And what is going up is B2B, business services. And this is a very important sign of restructuring.
For others, innovation means still catering to consumers, but in a way that reflects the difficult economic conditions.
It is a very innovative idea. Because we were so sure about our products and prices, we knew that even in the middle of this crisis, this business will make a profit.
Still, for every new business created, 4 shut down, a low survival rate likely to remain dismal for the foreseeable future. With overall unemployment at nearly 27% and nearly 57% for young Greeks, consumer demand is weak.
While startups continue to grow, consumers are becoming more and more reluctant to spend. And this lack of profit is what will eventually force most of these new businesses to vanish as quickly as they emerged. Philo Contrafori, CCTV, Athens.